Well, I don't know if you want to get into this or not. We have kind of peripherally touched on it, but I was going to get into dominance theory with you, and there's kind of a new notion that's becoming more and more prevalent that dominance theory has been debunked, and it is not the way we should approach things, and there's nothing to it, and so forth. Is that a hot potato that you want to play with, or would you rather move to something else?
Hey, I'm brave. I'm game.
Okay.
And I think, like so many things with horses, it's not that black and white. There's there is dominance. There is stuff that happens there, but it's not. I think talk about anthropomorphizing. I think this is a place that people anthropomorphize hugely when they think that horses want to be dominant. It's not something horses worry about. They want to feel safe. You know, they're social animals, they're prey animals. They want to feel safe. There's no value to being in a say a wild herd. Um, they have ranks, and rank is not the same thing as dominance. So in a wild herd, you see people will say, "Oh, here's the lead stallion." The stallions don't lead. Um, in a wild herd, the leader is whichever horse happens to be going first in line. And the leadership in a wild herd is sometimes defined as distributed because any horse can really decide to go anywhere, and she does not have the authority to make anybody go with her. So you have a group of horses out there grazing, and somebody decides she needs to go get a drink, which is probably one of the lactating mares. Need to go get a drink. So she heads off to wherever the water source is. And the other horses can follow or not. If they don't, probably she won't go. She'll probably wait for somebody else to go. The older and wiser that mare is, the more likely others will follow. The yearling filly decides she's going to go off someplace, probably nobody's going to be following her. And in fact, the stallion might go bring her back. So the only horses who have the authority to make another horse do something are the parents, essentially, where the mom can say to the foal, "You're not allowed to go there. You need to come back." Or the stallion will say to the little play group, like, "You guys have wandered far enough from the rest of the crowd. You need to come back now." But mostly what people think of as rank is horses telling somebody to get out of my space. So this is the way it works in the wild. And there's not a whole lot of aggression. If somebody comes into somebody else's space, you're entitled to say, "Get out of my space." If that horse outranks you, then you might just say, "Never mind, I'll leave." So what we see in domestic groups is started with those flawed studies of domestic animals. So if you take a group of horses and you put a bunch of horses who are not related to each other, because in the wild, basically a band is a family unit. So a lot of the rankings just go by age. Domestically, you take a group of horses who don't know each other. So you pasture them together. And unlike you, most people don't have the 45 acres for horses to really spread out and be comfortable with their space. A lot of people are keeping horses in smaller spaces. So we have horses who don't know each other. They're kept in a relatively confined space. Then you put in the hay. Um, and then you probably have some horses who are not well socialized, like the horses you talked about earlier, who didn't get that socializing learning from other horses as they were growing up. And so they don't know the protocols of saying, "Can I share your hay pile?" and taking no for an answer or knowing when the answer is yes. So this is when you see the dominance hierarchy, is when you have the resource guarding and the horses who are anxious about their own safety because they don't have the social skills to know how to get along with the other horses. So this is why dominance theory, I think, stuck around for so long. People look out at the horses in the paddock and go, "Well, you can't tell me there's not a dominance hierarchy." But it's really a resource guarding hierarchy. It's not, and the horse who looks like the leader is usually the one who's just strongest about guarding the resources. It does not make that horse a leader that everybody else would follow if they were all turned out in the wild.
So I've maybe a little different take on that. Um, to me, the new part of the conversation is the resource guarding aspect of it. To me, I view, like, when I've dealt with some wild horses and all too. Um, I didn't find them to be very gentle. I've noticed when I look at wild horses, all of them have a lot of scars on them, mares and stallions alike, from bite marks and things like that throughout uh, their time on the range. I did a lot of decoding of horse body language years ago, and I actually had a computer die that had the whole list and everything on it, and I lost it forever. This was before the cloud and all of that good stuff. But I had 3 or 4 things down that I could identify as clear body language signs of affection. So things like the mutual grooming, where they would bite each other on the withers, and then some other things that were specific to mares and foals. But I had 19 or 20 signs of aggression or threat, essentially. So we would all know, like, the pinned ears, and then you could cock in legs, and there were far more signs of aggression or threat within the horse's body language repertoire than there were of affection or getting along. Um, and to me, that is, it's pretty clear evidence of how encoded in them that hierarchy is. And, like, I've always used the example, if you don't believe in that there's dominance and hierarchy among horses, we'll put one bucket of feed in an arena and put 10 horses in there and come back tomorrow, and we'll see if they have the same amount of hair on them that they had when we left them in here. And so that does bring the resources into the picture. To me, all the resources exemplifies is a changing of degree of motivation. So we could also have other areas when they might fight, could be breeding season. Hormones are in there. So that could be for the stallions or the mares. Mares get a lot more aggressive when they're in heat and so forth. If they have a foal, then a mare who's mid level in the hierarchy may act like she's number 3 or something instead. She's going to be a lot more protective and aggressive with other horses that might come in there and make that foal feel threatened, or something like that. And to my mind, it's the opposite of what we're being told right now. The resource, or the idea that resource guarding is artificial, is backwards. A scenario in which there aren't challenges for resources is the actual artificial one. If we're talking about wild horses, then resources can very commonly be a problem. So I'll give an example of this. There was a man named Mr. Borba who had he documented all of this on Facebook some years back with a group of wild horses. Another aspect I like to bring in here with wild horses, and this particular stallion was the one. There was some documentary that had been done by, I believe, an animal rights type group. And to their credit, they actually included this in the documentary. But this stallion came in, took over a band of mares, chased the other stallion off. And what would be shocking to many people is one of the first things he did was kill 2 of the foals, young babies, and he grabbed them by the neck, and I mean, he killed them. The same sort of behavior that a lion might do if he took over a pride. And people would not ever attribute that type of aggression to a horse, but they in fact documented this and everything. That band got caught up and then was re-released on a parcel that this man owned water rights on, and they won. This is BLM land, but he had the water rights to this part. They wanted the horses to travel 20 miles to a water source that was off of his deeded ground, and where they had essentially control of the horses over there, and they would not allow him to pump water to water the horses. So he's documenting this day after day, going out here, and the horses will not leave. And of course, they're fighting, because this is now a life and death scenario. So we're getting into the resource guarding aspect of it. He actually winds up, now these are completely wild Mustangs. None of them are halter broke. have never had any interaction other than the time they were pinned up. He is able to go out there with a few panels and his stock trailer, back right up to the horses and load them in his stock trailer by himself. He brings them up to his ranch, puts them in the pens to give them hay and water, and the animal rights group calls the sheriff on him. The sheriff comes out there and threatens him with arrest if he doesn't return the horses to the area. They won't let him pump water. I forgot that in the first part of the story. So even though he owns the water rights and he's willing to pump water for the horses, they won't let him because they want the horses to go 20 miles to this other water source. And in the end, all of the horses wind up dying because they don't go the 20 miles. They won't let him pump the water, and they all die right there on the place. And I thought, first of all, that was a terrible example of stewardship of horses and the overreach of well-meaning and non-knowledgeable people in the stewardship of these horses. But in terms of what resources really mean to horses, I thought it was, or it is, a much more realistic example than the artificial world that we tend to put them in, where we have this, people will complain if the water trough isn't clean enough. You need to dump that out and clean it, right? And that's our world that we're bringing horses into. It isn't the world that horses are native to in reality. And so I think we tend to look at a lot of those scenarios with regard to resources backwards. The notion that resources aren't precious and aren't to be guarded and don't change the horse's behavior is the artificial notion. And in their native or natural settings, resources are a constant problem. And I think that's one of the reasons, like I don't, when I've observed wild horses, I do not, I don't see a gentle nature in them as a lot of people. It's kind of a constantly revolving hornet's nest. I've yet to see one that didn't have tons of scars on it.